Friends, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Paula Pearson. Dr. Dang has pulled rank on me, and now we're going to go to introduce somebody that he knows very well. We're going to ask First Lieutenant Nguyen-Vy Dang to come forward. He is Dr. and Mrs. Dang's only child, and he disobeyed his parents' wishes for him to become a doctor, but with the full support of his parents, he joined the United States Armed Forces instead to protect our country, our freedom, and democracy, following the steps of his grandfather. And now he's a first lieutenant stationed at Fort Benning, serving as the executive officer for Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Brigade, 3rd Infantry Division. He is a member of the 3rd Vietnamese American generation. Lieutenant Dang.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, Lieutenant General Carey, Major General Williams, Brigadier General Dang Dinh Lin. I'm honored to be here today as we celebrate the unveiling of this memorial. As I stand here before you, I'm humbled to be in the presence of heroes whose deeds I did not truly understand and appreciate until much later in my life. I was fortunate enough to be born into the first generation of my family to be raised in the United States. Growing up, my family would occasionally tell me stories of the Vietnam War, of the hardships they faced, and the sacrifices they and countless others made. I knew that my grandfather, an officer in the South Vietnamese Army, had spent 13 years in a North Vietnamese prison after the fall of South Vietnam. However, at the time, those were just stories to me. Stories of a distant land and a foreign struggle. As I grew older, I started to learn more about the Vietnam War. I learned about the young men who fought and sacrificed so much for their families, their country, and freedom. It was then that I started to realize the stories weren't so foreign after all. I realized they are an integral part of my heritage. My perspective changed from that of a bystander to that of a beneficiary. Without those brave men, I would not have had the opportunity to become a proud Vietnamese American. I began to see things differently. My grandfather, who's in the crowd today, stopped being the grumpy old guy who yelled at me for playing my music too loud or made me do ridiculous chores. He became the grandpa who spent most of his life serving his country and another 13 years in a prison after his country was lost. Taking out the trash and picking weeds didn't seem so bad anymore. I am fortunate, not just because of the opportunities that I've had in my life. I'm fortunate because I did not have to look very far for a reminder that those opportunities were made possible by the courage and sacrifice of the generations before me. It provided me with a context within which I made my own life decisions. It helped me to understand the meaning of duty and selflessness. The same may not be true for many others in my generation or future generations. As time goes on, I fear that without a reminder, without a tangible representation that American and South Vietnamese soldiers once fought side by side in the defense of freedom, future generations will forget the duty and selflessness exhibited by these men. To them, they will just be stories of a distant land and a foreign struggle. To quote the poet Wallace Bruce, who kept the faith and fought the fight, the glory theirs, the duty ours. This memorial serves not only to honor the heroes of South Vietnam and pay tribute to their deeds in the past, it serves as a reminder to my generation and future generations that though we live in the United States and enjoy freedoms that we often take for granted, we owe a debt of gratitude to those who paved the way for us to be in this great nation. Thank you very much, and God bless America. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to speak in Vietnamese for my elders in the audience. Kính thưa quý vị, cháu lớn lên ở nước Mỹ và tiếng Việt của cháu không được hay, nên xin quý bác, quý cô chú thông cảm và đừng cười tiếng Việt của cháu. Như bao người Việt Nam thế hệ của cháu sinh ra và lớn lên ở nước Mỹ, cháu đã không biết gì về lịch sử nước Việt Nam, cũng như về chương trình Việt Nam. Cháu chỉ biết ông nội cháu vì là sĩ quan của miền Nam Việt Nam nên đã bị ở tù Cộng sản 13 năm. Nhưng từ khi ba cháu bắt đầu chương trình xây cất tượng đài để nhớ ơn người chiến sĩ quân lực Việt Nam, Cộng hòa và Hoa Kỳ đã chiến đấu trong chiến tranh Việt Nam, cháu mới tìm hiểu thêm về cuộc chiến này và được ba cháu giải thích thêm. Nay cháu đã biết rằng nhờ công lao và hy sinh của biết bao người chiến sĩ đó mà cháu và những người Việt Nam cùng thế hệ mới có cơ hội sinh ra và lớn lên trong tự do ở đất nước này. Cháu đã biết rằng tự do không phải tự nhiên mà có, và biết bao người đã hy sinh và chiến đấu cho tự do. Cháu đã biết rằng đã có bao người Việt Nam phải bỏ nước ra đi tìm tự do, và biết bao người đã chết trên đường tìm tự do. Đó cũng là một trong những lý do mà cháu tình nguyện đi vào quân đội. Tiếp tục theo gương của ông nội và của các bác cụ chiến sĩ để tiếp tục bảo vệ tự do, chiến đấu cho quê hương thứ hai này của chúng ta. Cháu xin cảm ơn các bác đã cho cháu có những cơ hội ngày nay. Cháu rất hãnh diện là một người Việt Nam và sẽ cố gắng hết sức làm trọn bổn phận và trách nhiệm của một sĩ quan trong quân luật Hoa Kỳ để đem lại vinh dự cho dân tộc Việt Nam. Xin kính chào.
Colonel Dang, I think you're here. Would you stand and let us recognize you for your sacrifice? Colonel Dang? Thank you for being here today. Our next speaker is Colonel Anthony Wood. Tony Wood served over 30 years in the Marine Corps and now serves as an inspirational speaker. He's twice been awarded the Navy Cross. And Mr. Wood, Colonel Wood, if you go ahead and make your way up here. His decorations include the Legion of Merit, Bronze Star with Combat V, the Meritorious Service Medal, the Joint Service Commendation Medal, the Humanitarian Assistance Medal, and the Combat Action Ribbon. In 1968, he served in Vietnam as a platoon commander and advisor to the Korean Marine Corps Blue Dragon Brigade. And in 1974 and 5, commanded missions to resolve MIA cases in Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. In the course of the evacuation, he led over 100 civilian volunteers who assumed great risk to remain without protection, transporting over 5,000 Vietnamese to safety to waiting Marine helicopters. Colonel Anthony Wood.
I wish I had been awarded the Navy Cross twice. I'm going to be brief. I spent 27 months in Vietnam altogether. My first tour was as a lieutenant. I had an armored outfit with the Korean Marine Corps supporting the South Vietnamese Army. My second tour was a very different tour. I returned to Vietnam as a 28-year-old captain, and I was the field operations commander for the first half of my tour in the MIA resolution operations in South Vietnam. And that's where I saw the first example of great sacrifice and tragedy and on both sides. From Hue all the way down to Saigon, we operated in small teams from July of 1974 until February of 1975, when the war heated up very badly. During that period, I also was in contact with many American families who were desperately hoping that we would find at least the remains of their missing loved ones. And during that period, I made several incursions into Laos and Cambodia, where we had a number of MIA cases as well. The heroism continued, and my observations of it did. In February of 1975, I was abruptly ordered into a bunker in Saigon as a member of a special planning group and told by an Army Major General that I no longer would have my Special Forces team or Navy and Air Force detachments in the MIA search, but that now my job would be to assist in building an evacuation plan to get the Vietnamese employees and Americans out of the city to where General Carey's Marine forces would take them to safety. We didn't have any people. I won't go into why. We didn't have any security. So I had to get volunteers. So 100 Americans between 50 and 63 years old, civilians, volunteered. They volunteered to drive buses. They volunteered to control rooftops. They volunteered to do everything you can imagine. And they began training. Their heroism and their willingness was amazing. And then April 3rd occurred, the worst day of my life, I think. Many of you have probably heard of the baby lift. Thousands of Vietnamese orphans were being brought out back to the United States. We loaded 300 of the babies on board an Air Force C-5, a giant transport, and 30 of our finest volunteers, all ladies, got on board to take them back. The plane had explosive decompression at 2,500 feet,